Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another webinar here on Food Industry Executive. We're super excited to have you all here today. But before we dive in, I have just a couple of housekeeping items for you. First, if you have any questions at all, please just drop those into the questions panel and we will address them at the end of the broadcast. Second, we will send out a recording of the event later on this afternoon, so be sure to keep an eye out for that. And without further ado, I am thrilled to welcome you today to Aptean's webcast, Taste the Future, 2024 Food and Beverage Trends and Outlook. Every year, Aptean commissions an outside company to interview food and beverage companies to understand the trends, challenges, and opportunities in the industry. And this year, B2B International Inc. surveyed 200 of your food and beverage peers. And today, Jack is going to dive into those results to interpret what's to come for food and beverage in 2024. So with that, let's get into the presentation. Jack, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Hillary, and welcome everyone for joining us. In the spirit of the day of October 31st, All Hallows Eve, Halloween, we had a guest appearance show in today, a very well-known figure in the food and beverage industry. If you haven't already figured it out, Ronald McDonald is here today with you, and I'll be sitting in as Ronald. To give you a little background on this, my daughter-in-law actually has a degree in event planning. She organizes family get-togethers, family outings very well. Always organizes our Halloween. And the theme for today is McDonald's. So I'm showing up as Ronald. I was invited to be Ronald. Kids are going to be Hamburglar, and there's going to be French fries. And I also hear the other grandparents may be crashing the party coming as Burger King and Wendy's. I'm not sure. I'll find out. But let's go on with today's session. First thing we're going to do is give a little bit more information on our demographics of our survey. Then we'll get into our headlines. We'll review some of the industry challenges. And as you probably are aware, two of the key challenges the food and beverage industry is facing is both supply chain disruptions and workforce shortages. We'll review what other companies are doing to address those issues. We'll talk about technology in terms of movement to cloud-based ERP and also the digital transformation journey. And we'll end up with looking to the future, and we'll have a question and answer session at the end. So let's get started. As Hillary said, 200 respondents. Those respondents were broken into three categories. Processors being that first level of food manufacturing of basically taking whatever has been harvested, has been grown, and producing that not to finish good, but typically producing that to go to the next level in the supply chain, next step. Being a food manufacturer who is typically producing foods going to either retail for consumers, going to food service, so eventually get to us as consumers, are now more into the e-commerce direct-to-consumer channel, as well as food and beverage distributors. Now that respondent pool was 80% plus US, 18% in Canada. And then in terms of revenue, I think a very good representation in terms of company size with this. So with that company size, 30% in that 100 million to 250, almost 45% below that, and then 27% above that. As we get into looking at some of the survey results, we will actually break it down by company size. And we'll see how some of the smaller, newer, emerging companies, less than 20 million, how those companies in that 20 to 100 million, how they may differ from companies once they've reached 100 million. And then finally, the different industries. So try to get as much representation as we could across various industries. The highest being in baked goods and fruits and vegetables, the lowest being in milling and coffee and tea products. So let's get into the survey results. The first portion are key headlines, and then we'll get into a lot of the details after this. So probably not a big surprise, probably not a big headline is revenue for 2023 for those companies that are on a calendar year, fiscal year, have not closed yet, but their expectations are revenue for 2023 is going to be greater than 2022. Also expect their profits to be higher than 2022. In fact, 74% of companies surveyed saw revenue growth in the prior year in 2022, and 79% are expecting additional growth in 2023. Now, this is actually in the light of challenges being faced. You know, top of those challenges, inflation and material prices. Now, I think part of this is what's driving the increased revenue. That typically, if your material prices have gone up, typically your selling prices go up. So while we're measuring this revenue, we're not measuring in volume. I have talked directly with certain customers of ours. They are also seeing some volume increases with increased demand, along with inflation, which is creating that higher revenue coming in. Higher cost. The other two key areas that they're facing as challenges are those changing consumer demands, consumer preferences. You know, as consumers, we're fickle in our expectations and what we want, but we're also seeing supply chain challenges in terms of material and ingredient availability of goods coming in. In terms of supply chain disruption and labor shortages, there have been a number of actions that they have addressed, they've taken to address this. Now, I don't really endorse maybe the number one here in terms of what's created the biggest percentage increase in revenue. And so looking at the various actions taken and saying which of those actions have led to the greatest revenue growth, or we're not taking the actions. Number one was adding inventory, building up inventory. Well, I think this may be a good short-term solution. I don't think it's a good long-term solution. For those companies that made a decision to do this, they did see revenue growth because it helped to minimize some of those supply chain disruptions. Also, overseas suppliers, also taking in producing some of their own products, where they may have been outsourcing it to contract manufacturers. They were doing some of this, but also from a planning and scheduling and using technology to improve their scheduling capabilities and improve their forecasting capabilities as ways to address the supply chain disruption. And then in terms of labor shortages, number one improvement they saw was from using technology to prevent knowledge loss with this. Also using technology to automate more tasks. As you have less labor, how can we use automation to provide that gap? Also reskilling or upskilling employees. Again, very common. As you bring technology, you bring automation into the process, and some of those entry-level positions maybe go away, of reskilling those employees to do more skilled jobs. Also looking at hybrid roles, remote roles, and something that some of the smaller companies saw was changing manufacturing locations. So if I'm maybe a $10 million or $12 million manufacturer, changing that location may not be as difficult as if I'm a $100 million manufacturer. So these are the actions that saw the greatest improvement in terms of revenue. Again, not the number one actions taken by companies in our survey, but the actions that resulted in the best revenue growth. Now, one of the things that we've seen over the various surveys we've done, and this is our 4th annual food and beverage survey, is sustainability is always a key role. It's always a key challenge. It's always a key challenge in addressing sustainability with this, with over 84% saying they're making significant efforts to be more sustainable. And out of this, they're expecting higher revenue and better profits than companies that are not doing this. And in fact, what was actually motivating them was efficiency improvements. And we all know that efficiency improvements result in lower cost, results in providing more capacity, giving you the capability to sell more with this. But our companies categorized themselves into 3 different categories, where they were a consider themselves to be a leader in sustainability, an aspirer to be a leader, or a laggard in sustainability. And while even though laggards still had revenue growth and had profit growth, they did not have as much profit and revenue growth. And if you look at the difference between the laggard and the leader, not quite double the amount of revenue growth, but look at the profit growth, 5 times the profit growth by being more efficient through sustainability practices within the organization. And then 3 primary actions, pretty much equal with this is, evaluating the supply chain, making the supply chain more sustainable, which is increasing efficiency, typically reducing cost. Same thing with packaging. That typically reduces cost, and also focusing on reducing waste throughout the process. All of these are going to provide cost savings to the company, which is going to result in the profit growth that they have seen. We really won't spend much more time talking about sustainability today, but this is a key action, a key trend that we continue to see in the food and beverage industry. Now let's talk about industry challenges. We have actually 2 sections in here to talk about. The first section is what are the external pressures the company are seeing. And then the second one is what challenges have companies actually experienced in the past 12 months. And we'll be talking about actions and how they're addressing those challenges. So this is a ranking on external pressures. And each of the survey companies was able to rank this from a 1 as not having concern to a 5 as a significant concern. Top 3, again, no big surprise. We've kind of already touched on these in our key headlines. Inflation and higher material prices. Along with inflation comes higher operating costs, but also changing consumer expectations and habits. 3 years ago when we were in the pandemic, consumers changed into eating at home, different types of meals. I'm going to call it, some of those changes were into comfort food. But now, as we have kind of got past that point, but we're more into this inflationary period, consumer habits are changing. I think a lot of those are being changed as a result of inflation and higher costs. I know as I myself go into the grocery store to buy goods, some of the foods that I had been buying in the past couple of years, there's more limited supply of those foods. But then there's maybe a higher supply of more value conscious type products with that. So again, consumer demands are driving that. Close behind this is material availability. But then 2 honorable mentions, and I think this is the first time I've seen this in the survey, is concern about cyber attacks, cyber threats to this. This made number 5 on the list. 25% of the companies, this is a significant concern to them. And then the other is geopolitical conflict. The past 2 years, this has been in the top 3. So it is still a concern. If you look at that number 4 in the orange color, you can see it's not the most significant concern, but it still has a high peace of mind here. But it's being displaced by these other challenges or other concerns that I think are more due to inflation, rising costs. Now, another way that I looked at this was said, okay, let's look at the 4s and the 5s together. Does that change anything with this? It doesn't really change anything so much in the top 4, so to speak. Top 1, top 2 are the same. 3 and 4 maybe swap places, but they're so close anyway. Material and ingredient availability, supply chain, along with consumer expectations, maybe they're a tie for number 3. But look down at the bottom, look at this geopolitical conflict. If I add those 2 together, that's a 59. That makes that a number 5 or number 6, so to speak. So higher in the ranking with this. It's still a concern, still a major concern. Just wasn't ranked that significant level of concern with this. The other way that was looked at this was, how does this affect companies in these different revenue sizes? I'm going to say the less than 20 million are these smaller, typically family-owned, maybe fairly new companies, versus that 20 million to 100 million or more mature companies, They're still growing, still finding the way versus these companies that are greater than 100 million. This was pretty much consistent across all of the sizes. The top three for the less than 20 million was the same top three. The top three for the 20 to 50, and the top three for the 100, all the same. But look at the percentage differences. Rising inflation material price was a significant concern for 50% of the companies in that 20 to 100 million category. Not as big a concern if you're under 20 million, but it's still a fairly significant concern if you're over the 100 million. So just, where are you in terms of company size as to how significant these concerns are? The next thing I did was I went back and looked at 2022 in terms of these external pressures. Now, so let's take the top five. So anything that ranked on the top five, either 2023 or 2022, let's compare where those ranked. Inflation was number one in both. Our operating costs went from like 10 to number 2. It raised 9 places. Consumer expectations stayed about the same. Material availability went from a 10 to a 4. It raised significantly. Cyber threats raised significantly. And then the two that went down, and the one that I'm still trying to understand, so we talked about the geopolitical conflict, but labor shortages has gone down as a concern about external pressure. And I think the reason being is companies are now viewing this more as a challenge to that organization. We'll see that as we move into the next topic in terms of what are challenges that companies are seeing. So again, those rising costs is the number one. Skill shortage, labor shortages, number 2. So I think they moved it from the external pressure to make it now a challenge they're seeing. It's a supply chain disruption. And we talked about this in the key headlines in terms of what are companies doing in terms of addressing the skill shortage, what are they doing in terms of addressing the supply chain disruption. But when we look at this in terms of company size again, you can see we're kind of across the board here. Again, everyone has rising costs as their number one challenge they're facing. But the smaller companies are not seeing staffing or labor shortages as great as others. Again, I think it's smaller companies or maybe family type workforce and friends. It is a concern, but not as big. Supply chain disruption, but reduced demand for consumers. They're seeing this as a challenge with this. Again, it's a concern for other companies, but not quite as high. But then when I look to that 20 to 100 million, that third category is trying to analyze data about their performance and their efficiency. They've grown to the size. They probably don't have technology or automation that's helping them track their performance, their efficiency. And they probably have outgrown their manual methods in doing this, is my interpretation of why this ranks so high in that size company. Whereas $100 million companies, they have the technology, they have the resources to be able to automate and collect this information. The next thing is in terms of how are companies addressing this? And so they are using technology. They are investing in technology to address this. And if you look all the way from top to bottom, 50% have either already invested, plus another 30 to 40% are currently looking to invest. So meeting industry regulations and compliance, food safety, traceability, kind of down the low in the list of challenges, but it's still a key requirement of food and beverage companies. And again, as you grow, those manual systems are harder and harder to support your food safety and traceability. So they're looking for technology to do this. Also on the efficiency side of it. So how can we track this? We can't improve if we can't track. If we don't track, we don't know where the problems are that we need to take action on. So using this, and also this skill shortage. If you look at skill shortage, not only have 49% invested, 42% are planning to invest. So if you add those two together, That's the highest in any category here. Or we're looking at ways to invest in technology for labor shortages with this. And I thought it was kind of interesting. Number 4 was a 3-way tie, very close to number 3. Maintaining inventory. We did see that one of the actions that reaped the best benefit in terms of revenue was increasing your inventory, but again, I think that's a short-term thing to do. But managing your inventory, managing your cost, and replacing outdated or legacy systems so you have better information with this. Is that a 3-way tie for 4th place with this? So I'll spend a little bit more time looking at supply chain disruption, looking at labor shortages, and seeing what companies are doing to address these. So again, I typically like to look at the top 3. And then if there's a tie here, sometimes I expand that to 4. You can see I've expanded that to the top 6 because there's a 4-way tie for number 3 here. The ways companies are looking to overcome adding new suppliers to their portfolio. So instead of having maybe 1 or 2 suppliers, adding additional suppliers that can provide their goods. Looking at scheduling systems, planning and scheduling to make better use, smarter use of their capacity and their availability. Every hour spent in changeovers that you can save through better scheduling is an hour of capacity that you get back from this. Also looking at contingencies to the supply chain plan. This was one of the key downfalls when the pandemic started. Is we had a very robust, very inflexible supply chain, and people did not have contingencies in place. People recognize that we do need contingencies for anything that happens in the future, but as well as disruptions that we are having with this. And then the next 3, improving forecasting capabilities, because the better you can forecast, the better you can source your materials, the better you can plan your production. So this is seen as a key need for this. Local suppliers, if you can source to local suppliers as part of your portfolio, you're dealing with less transportation requirements. With this, you're also reducing your carbon footprint in terms of sustainability. So a lot of improvement with this. And this last one, I had to kind of scratch my head and think about this, increasing quality checks. And then if I start thinking about it, this gets back into supplier certification and making sure that suppliers are providing goods that meet inbound quality checks. So that if I have receipts that fail quality, that can cause a disruption in my supply chain unless I'm stocking additional inventory. But again, if I'm dealing with short shelf life ingredients going in, I really can't stock that much extra inventory. So making sure that we're having those qualified suppliers, making sure that we're doing our quality checks as they're coming in so that we don't find out later that we've had a problem with this. And then I'll kind of point out building up inventory. It's down the list about number 9. Now, in the past year, it has reaped the biggest increase in terms of revenue. Is probably possibly because some of the others have not been fully put into place yet in terms of getting new suppliers on board and improving your scheduling and coming up with contingency plans. But again, I think it was a good short-term action to this. Now, how did these top 3 or top 6? How did this fare across the different industry sizes? Again, number 1 for that small company was adding new suppliers. Number 2 and number 3. Number 2 was similar. Number 3, different materials. Coming up with alternative ingredients going into the products they're producing. So they saw this was something that would help them in their supply chain disruption. For those companies in the 20 to 100 million, increasing the quality checks was number 1 thing they did to help them overcome that supply chain disruption. Again, as you're a smaller company, you're probably more in touch with your suppliers. Fewer suppliers as you get larger, you're probably not as close of a touch with that, and more suppliers. So getting back in touch with those and making sure you're getting quality products from those suppliers. And then increasing local suppliers, building up inventory. This is the category that built up the most inventory, and bringing goods back in, manufacturing their own products. As they start getting larger and you start having capacity constraints, one of the ways to do that before you add on capital is to look for outside outsourcing. So bringing some of that back in to help them maintain their supply chain. And then we look at the 100 million, pretty much similar as to the total. Again, adding new suppliers, improving the supply chain, but also streamlining supplier onboarding. Again, larger companies, larger suppliers, probably a more sophisticated process, but now we're streamlining that process to help us overcome supply chain disruption as we add those new suppliers to our portfolio. So now as we start looking at labor shortages, what are companies doing? And again, we've touched on this already in those key headlines. Reskilling, upskilling employees, using technology to prevent knowledge loss, and to automate more tasks. These probably make sense when we look at these and see these. What's kind of interesting is increasing wages. And I think this was a lesson learned during the pandemic. Just because you increase wages doesn't mean that you retain employees. It doesn't mean that you retain the skills. So there are other things that should be done. Now, wages are important. You need to be able to match wages or have good wages, but it was not considered in the top 3. In fact, it was down into number 6, just right above temporary labor constraints. And again, now looking at company sizes, what are they doing? Small companies with that small labor force, number one action they were doing was increasing wages with this. And then number 2 were the similar what everybody else is doing. Reskilling, upskilling, and using technology. If you're that 20 to 100 million, you're automating tasks. And then we have a 3-way tie for 2. Reskilling, restructuring your workforce, restructuring the days of the week. And this is what I think is kind of looks a little bit interesting here. So when we're looking at supply chain, we saw that in that 20 to 100 million, they were bringing some of those outsourced products in to help with supply chain, but we also see they're increasing outsourcing to help with staffing. So, which is it? Are they increasing or are they decreasing with this? So I think they're taking different actions, whether it's a labor or whether it's a capacity or a material constraint they have. And then when we look at larger companies greater than 100 million, pretty much on track with the top 3 as we have with this. Now let's look at what's happened on the role of technology in terms of cloud-based ERP and what's happening in the digital transformation journeys that companies are on. So our survey showed in North America, 24% of the companies have already moved to cloud. We have another 33% that are in the process of moving. They're not there yet. It does take time to do this. So now what we're seeing between this, 57%. So this time next year, we should see more than 50% of companies have already moved to cloud-based ERP solution. We see 27% are investigating it. We got 16% that are happy on premise, no plans to move to cloud ERP for whatever reasons they have. Again, when we break this down by size, we see that 20 to 100 million is the one leading the way, with a third of these companies have moved to cloud. So when I look at the larger companies, they probably have a lot more investment in on-premise technology, and moving that from on-premise to cloud is probably takes a longer process, even though they're about with the average 23%. Smaller companies, they haven't adopted quite as much. They are still doing a lot of investigation in terms of moving to the cloud. But when we look at them in total, 69% of those mid-sized companies have moved or in the process of moving, and then everybody else is 54% in process of moving. But I think the real story here is what's happened over the last 3 years in terms of cloud. Of the 4 choices, the 4 category, I'm on premise, I have no plans to move to cloud. 2 years ago, that was 62%. Last year, they had gone to 49%. Look at how much that has dropped to 16%. We still have about 25%, about 1 in 4, still investigating cloud. Doesn't mean they're going to move it, but they're investigating cloud. But look at what's happened in terms of companies either in the process or have moved to cloud. And just look at the steep increase over the 3 years from 7%, double to 16%, and then add another 8% on to 24% with this. And then we have this 33% that are moving, that 24%. My prediction is probably going to be 48 or 50% a year from now. So 3 years ago, I think we were just coming out of that early adopter stage in terms of cloud-based ERP. We're well past that now. We're now into that first majority phase of moving to the cloud. And then probably in about a year, we're probably going to be about halfway through that. There's still going to be laggards. There's still going to be companies that don't move, but very much have shown with this the progression to cloud as a viable strategy that a lot of companies are taking on. Why are companies moving to the cloud? And as part of my role with Aptean, I work with potential customers that are evaluating our solutions and how that works to their business requirements. I also spend part of my time working with existing customers and utilizing features they're not utilizing, helping them make an analysis and analyzing this investigation in the cloud. And these top 3 things are things that I'm seeing with those companies that are doing that. They're looking to mitigate their risk, looking for disaster recovery plans, looking for cyber protection with this, that typically that you would get with a cloud-based ERP system. They're looking for increased mobility. There were a number of companies that were hamstringed with on-premise systems with limited VPN capabilities to these. So with cloud-based systems, you can still have that security from a user perspective and from an access, but you can have mobility with that provided for that. But also sustainability. Again, this is a key important part for food and beverage companies. And what we see, these are the drivers for that. They also are looking for other areas, better integration of systems, help them fuel their digital transformation journey with this. Again, labor shortages in the technology area, so that less resources are required, so that they can now work with their ERP cloud partner to provide these kind of capabilities. We had similar information last year, but more current. Of those 24% of companies have moved to the cloud. They've been on the cloud long enough to say what's happened from a financial performance with this. Again, we've seen that just being in the food and beverage industry, revenue growth, due to increased demand, due to increased costs and increased prices. But those companies that have moved to the cloud have had increased revenue growth in this year, 10% versus 8%. But I think the more important part is what has that done to the bottom line in terms of your profit growth? Being able to utilize these technologies, being able to be more efficient from a cloud offering has also allowed them to increase their profit growth with this. Also, they're more optimistic about the future in terms of revenue, in terms of profit in those companies that have not currently moved to the cloud. Along with this is your digital transformation journey. And this is something that we've been tracking as our fourth year in terms of where does the company stand? Have they not started this, or are they not planning on doing this? Have they started the process? Starting the process may be implementing an ERP system, or maybe upgrading the ERP, or maybe moving to cloud ERP, or maybe getting the right technology to do this. But we've made the decision to do it, and we're beginning the process. Once we've begun the process, we're in the process of our digital transformation, collecting data, whether it's barcode scanning, whether it's sensors that we're collecting information with, so that we're no longer doing this manually and writing it down, entering it into the system. But once we do this, we really want to analyze this information and basically alerts and business insights so that we can make improvements with this. And then, once we get through our journey, we say we've completed that digital transformation journey, and we're realizing the benefits from this. And so if we look at where companies stand, over 40% are now getting benefit from the digital transformation journey. Almost a third are in the process of doing it. The companies that have completed this, again, they are expecting this to give them increased revenue and increased profit in 2023. Now, when we look at comparing this to where we're at 3 years ago, this is our fourth year, again, we had 10% of those companies that had either not started, not planning to start. That hasn't changed. But what's changed is the progress across the journey. And starting on the right side, going back to the left, 2% had completed this 3 years ago. Now, 17%. So additional 15% of companies have done this. 26% of companies are getting close to completion, where they're getting the information and getting business insights, compared to 15%, 3 years ago. So if those have gone up, the other two have gone down. So we're farther along our journey than we were 3 years ago. And I think, 2 years ago, I was talking about digital transformation. It is a journey. It's typically about a 3-year process. Some companies, it's longer than a 3-year process, depending upon where you start, what your destination is. And we're seeing this, and we're seeing these companies are getting toward the end of that journey. But again, my opinion is it's a continuous improvement project, that once you reach that initial destination, there are going to be other destinations as you continue to gather information and find ways to continually improve. And then as we compare this to different company sizes, what we'll see is those companies that are 100 million plus, they're further along in their journey at 21% with this. But those companies that are in the 100 million, 20 to 100 million, they've recognized this is a journey they need to be on. And they're well along the way to the journey, and they've almost caught up to the larger companies in terms of completing that journey. And then the companies that are the smaller, less than 20%, these are the companies that have not made as much progress. And again, it makes sense based upon company size with this. What areas are companies expecting to see? And equipment utilization, better utilization, less downtime, improvements in inventory, improvements in warehousing. Number 3 doesn't apply to everybody. That's why I have a number 4 is improved in e-commerce and direct to consumer. Not every food and beverage company is in this particular category, but then the next 4 or 3, if you're not doing e-commerce, is supply chain. But again, improvement across all the areas: procurement, overall equipment effectiveness, analytics, business intelligence, quality, safety, sales, and service. So expecting improvements across all the business processes, with these 3 or 4 being typically the highest ones of those. Now, as we start coming to an end in our presentation today, let's look at what companies are doing in terms of strategies to meet their goals. So this is what they have been doing throughout 2023 to meet their business goals. improving the supply chain, improving their operational efficiency and integration, increasing their visibility is what they rank, but lots of other areas along with this. And again, we see differences depending upon the size of companies. Those less than 20 million, they have other things that are looking like customer satisfaction and acquiring new customers. And you can remember one of the things we saw as a challenge was reduced customer demand. So they need to make that up with improving customer satisfaction and more customers. That 20 to 100 million, again, improving efficiency, streamlining their business processes as they've grown, optimizing their pricing and their services. And then the 100 million plus, typically in that top 3 category with that. Now, what's interesting with this is what are companies doing today and what are companies planning to do in the next 4 years? So there's a lot of information. This is a very busy slide for this. Let's just kind of look at the highlights of this and not so much into the details. Those areas that are highlighted in orange are actions they're taking today to improve their supply chain, to improve their workforce, to improve their business. Same things they're going to be doing the next 4 years with this. But some of the things are dropping off, which is being a little bit surprising, like improving supply chain resilience is going from number 1. So I guess maybe this is something that you've achieved and now it kind of drops off to being replaced going forward next year to attracting the best people and having the best high performing teams with this, moving to predictive maintenance, focusing on product development and R&D. And then the numbers on the right show the ranking of how this is either increased or decreased or pretty much stayed the same. So it just shows that companies, not only they're looking to do today, they're making plans for the next 4 years in terms of what actions they want to do with this. And while workforce may not be in the top 10 this year, they're seeing things they need to address. This is something they're moving into, addressing workforce in the next years to come. Then what are they saying are the barriers to achieving those goals? Lack of skill, lack of knowledge. This is having the technical abilities, the technical skill to be able to achieve this. Also, and I think this is more prevalent in the smaller companies and the mid-sized companies, is the day-to-day demands of running the business. They're not people focused on projects or continuous improvement with this. I'm not saying large companies have this as well too, but typically the smaller companies, people wear multiple hats. And there's day-to-day demands makes it more difficult. And then either a complex or ambiguous strategy. So a complex project is very difficult to do. Making that relevant, making that simplistic is one of the key things. What's quite interesting is the bottom of the list is not having access to capital to do these projects. So it looks like capital is not a problem in most cases. It's really having the skills and having the time to be able to implement these actions to be able to improve your business and achieve your business goals. So key takeaways. This was kind of a closing survey that said, tell us your number 1 goal that you have for the next 12 months as a business. For all the others, you could pick multiple, you could pick 2, 3, 4 of these. But what is your top goal with this? 20% of the companies said they want to increase their revenue as part of this. Now, increasing revenue is going to be other things coming along with it, but 20% increasing revenue, 12% increasing workforce, and 12% increasing productivity. These go kind of hand in hand. More capacity, more output, more productivity with this. Entering new markets. So new products, new markets, new customers with this. And then also the 5th one, when something we haven't really talked about is artificial intelligence, machine learning, also business intelligence, using the right technology, introducing technology to provide the information necessary to achieve their business goals. If you're able to scan the QR code, we have a report that we provide that goes through the top 6 trends in food and beverage for 2024. It talks about some of the key benefits, why it's important, and some of the key takeaways in these that you can download from this. I also think that this presentation is also available to you as well. And then Hillary, I'm going to turn it back over to you for our question and answer session.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jack. A few questions for you here. The first one is ERP the starting point for digital transformation?
In my opinion, it is. So there typically needs to be some type of a business system with this. And again, depending upon your business, typically ERP is because it is that business system, that transactional system. And ERP systems have been around and prior for a lot of years. Before that, we had MRP and MRP2. Those that have been in the industry as long as I have. And data has to get into the system. So, whether it gets into the system manually or whether it gets into the system through barcode scanning or through IoT and sensors or whatever method gets into it, that does become your system of record. It is your business system, your transactional system. So I do think the ERP system is really that foundation that you have, and then you're able to build upon that foundation to achieve the goals that you're looking to achieve.
Okay, next one here is, on average, how long does it take to select and implement an ERP?
That is a very interesting question. So typically most people start their buying process today different than they started 30 years ago. Most people have either had some experience or somebody's involved with experience. You may have attended a certain thought leadership webinars like this. You may have seen online demonstrations with this. So that buying process probably starts before you engage, maybe even evaluating certain solutions. But it can be, you need to understand your business requirements, you understand your needs, your challenges, and evaluate those systems. And again, just like in implementing technology and goals, you have to run the business on a day-to-day basis. I've seen companies go through an evaluation process in 3 months for an ERP solution. That's probably close to the minimum. I've seen companies take over a year to do this. And I think a lot of times what I've observed and how long it takes them to go through the evaluation process has influence on how long it's going to take the implementation process. If it takes a company a year to go through an evaluation process, and I'm not saying anything's wrong with this, that may be on their timeline, they're not going to implement it in 3 months. It's going to take longer to implement something typically than it's going to take to make an evaluation and a selection process. Most companies in the mid-market is typically, we consider a 9 to 12 month implementation using a industry-specific solution such as ours from food and beverage. If you're dealing with a generic solution, it's probably going to take longer. But again, it depends upon the resources that you have in terms of your project team to implement to be able to support your timeline. But typically 3 to 6 months should be a evaluation selection, and typically 9 to 12 should be a implementation.
Okay, thank you. Another potentially loaded question for you. How will AI impact food and beverage?
I think it's going to impact not just food and beverage, it's going to impact industry. And I think it's already doing that in certain areas. And I think the first way that AI does this is through business intelligence. And there are tools that are available today, commercially available, that actually includes artificial intelligence built into it. For example, Power BI by Microsoft has insights built into it. So that, let's say that you are using Power BI to analyze your data, you've collected that data, you're going through the analysis of it. It also has a built-in insights tool that can help you understand the trends that are going on. It can look at anomalies and point out anomalies. It can look at short-term trends. It can look at long-term trends that are going, that can help you. And I think that's quite interesting as I've gone through and let's say I've test-driven the insights within this. I know other tools have the same type of information. Part of artificial intelligence is machine learning. And with an ERP, there's a lot of repetitive transactional type information. For example, invoices coming in for suppliers. Today, if you've got somebody who's an accounts payable and, through experience, they picked up over time that invoices this supplier typically tend to be, this frequency and typically within this dollar range or amount range. But then all of a sudden, if they get an invoice in that's 10 times what they normally get, that triggers an alert in that particular individual. Well, what happens when that individual's not there? Excuse me. And what happens, what we've seen with changes in the workforce. So this is where technology can come into play through machine learning, that the ERP system can actually track these invoices by supplier. And it can recognize when that anomaly comes in as an invoice that comes in out of the normal pattern, whether it's I'm getting 3 invoices a week instead of 1 invoice a month, or I'm getting invoiced for 5x or 10x what I normally get. It doesn't mean the invoice is incorrect or wrong. It just means that it should have raised an alert to make sure that this is a valid invoice. But then as we take that simple example, we push that all the way through all the transactions occurring throughout ERP for the sales related activities with customers, so that it can alert when you don't get an order from a customer, or alerts that when a customer leaves certain items off the order they typically order, or they order outside their normal buying patterns. So again, these are all things that machine learning and artificial intelligence can do for us from a customer service side. You can also do the same thing from a planning and scheduling. And a lot of the advanced planning tools already have advanced technology built into this to provide better. So I'm really excited about what artificial intelligence and machine learning can do to technology and to provide benefits to the industry as we go forward.
Amazing. Thank you. All right. Next question here is, everyone talks about the cloud and its benefits, but is it drastically more expensive?
Is that a statement or a question? I guess it's a question. And, this was, I guess, a thought maybe 10 years ago. It just costs more to move to the cloud. And so one of the things that we've done, I know, other consultants have done is, well, let's look at the total cost of ownership. What does it cost you today for on-premise systems? There's licensing required for that, there's space required for that, there's people required, there's disaster recovery, cybersecurity plans. What is the true cost of all that? And then what's the cost to move to the cloud? And then, what are the benefits that you may get from a cloud-based subscription? Are upgrades included versus having to pay for that on premise? Are updates and patches included? Typically disaster recovery and cyber protections included. So I think just making a statement that cloud costs more is probably not a valid statement in today's world of cloud. If we've seen that over 50% of the food and beverage companies have either moved to cloud or in the process of moving to cloud, they've probably taken a look at it from both a business perspective, what's going to be for the business, but also from a financial perspective. They've looked at it in both ways. And these companies have said, cloud is the right decision to support their business today and support their business into the future. And if I came off like a commercial, I apologize, just kind of speaking of what I've observed over the past few years.
Okay, thank you. Kind of tying into that, the next question is here. Should we use an on-premise ERP as a starter system and then eventually move to the cloud?
Yeah, I think that is a decision every company has to make. What we've seen over the last 3+ years is 90% of our new customers either came from an on-premise system or they, didn't really have an ERP system to start with, decided to implement it in the cloud, from cloud-based. So I guess it's kind of that question is, when you're starting out as a family, do you do a starter home before you move into your next home? Do you consider on-premise as a starter versus the cloud? Now, one of the benefits of the cloud is scalability. It is that if you're, let's say, a emerging company, you're starting out small, you can start out with the cloud small, and it can scale with you as you grow. Versus if you're a small company and you're buying just the hardware for today, what's going to happen like 2 years from now when you outgrow that hardware? Versus do you buy for 2 years from now and have those empty bedrooms, so to speak, for 2 years? So I think everybody has to look at their own, but I think there's a lot of merit in looking at cloud as a solution that you can scale if you grow with.
All right, thank you. Next one here is, what types of software are companies implementing?
Oh, lots of software, lots of types of software with this. And we're seeing companies that have made ERP solutions, but we're seeing what we would term as beyond ERP, kind of a play on industry terms with beyond meat products. Is these are complementary solutions. These are solutions that deal with product development and R&D. We saw that as one of the goals that companies are working toward. So how can that process be automated? The typical product development cycle is about 13 months. Yes, 13 months from inception of a product to get to market. And then the use of product lifecycle management tools can reduce that. Some of them can reduce that to as much as 13 weeks to get through the cycle with that. We're looking at ways to increase utilization of equipment, the enterprise asset management, and to get into predictive maintenance with this. We're looking at companies that are doing OEE. We saw that as some of the goals and challenges companies have is managing their efficiency and tracking not just their OEE, but having systems that can point out the reasons for bottlenecks, reasons for inefficiencies with this. Companies that are distribution, warehousing, transportation. So, almost every processor, manufacturer, distributor has to distribute their products to their customers. And whether you have your own internal fleet of trucks, whether you have a dedicated fleet, whether you use common carriers or whatever, so there's typically some optimization. And that's one of the areas where we've seen increased cost is in transportation costs in the price of diesel fuel. So improving that and reducing that is where we're seeing people spending on technology. We're seeing people with technology in terms of equipment automation. I was a recent trade show, and I happened to sit in on a presentation about lights out baking. This is where a company had automated the baking process, that instead of taking 2 people plus a supervisor to manage a baking process, they had gotten it down to basically 1 person part-time supervising it. So a lot of automation to save labor with that. So those are just some of the examples where I see people investing in technology in addition to ERP.
All right, thanks, Jack. Have 1 more minute left, and I think time to answer one more question from the audience. Where is Wendy in Burger King?
I don't know. I'm hearing tonight when I go to my grandchildren that the other grandparents who are supposed to be out of town may be showing up as the Burger King and as Wendy. I'm not sure, but there may be a few when I show up.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you so much, Jack. And thank you everyone for joining us today. It was an excellent presentation. As I mentioned before, we will be sending out the recording and the slides later on today. So keep an eye on your inbox for that and have a wonderful rest of your day.